Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. Let's talk about the methods of research, and in particular I would propose you to consider two who would have thought that they are called the method of Theseus, or at least that's how I call them, the method of Theseus and the method of Ulysses, or Odysseus, or whatever is the alternative. But Ulysses is kind of simpler, easier to pronounce at the very least, in English, I should add. So let's talk about those two. And in particular, well, when I'm talking about the methods of research, I'm of course implying like methods of scientific research, but really I think the scope of the applicability of those are actually broader, and it involves more like pathfinding and search in general, so it can be generalized onto other things as well, although I wouldn't guarantee that it's all other things, right? But something like that. So, and those analogies or those metaphors of Theseus and Ulysses, they are really the best I can do to sound, philosophical, which means basically pseudo-philosophical, so bear with me here. But hopefully you'll find them useful to at least remember what I was talking about. And another thing I wish to mention in this introduction is that it's obviously the third opposition sort of video. We had cities versus villages, we had assassins and Templars, which I was even ashamed enough to not even call assassins versus Templars, and this one is going to be like the method of Theseus and the method of Ulysses, whereas it's really versus or against, right? But what are you gonna do? I mean, it's pretty useful, I believe, a pretty good heuristic vehicle, this opposition type of consideration, because it brings conflict and drama and stuff, and people love conflict and drama and stories. That's why soap operas are so popular, but whatever. At least I can promise you that the next video wouldn't have such a title. Not speaking about the contents, but at least the title. At least the one that I'm thinking about wouldn't. Okay, so, alright, let's describe those two methods. In particular, the first method, the method of Theseus, as I call it, again, it's all my own systematics, my own nomenclature as well, so you would probably never find it anywhere else. At least hopefully, or otherwise it wouldn't be mine, because I just made up those titles literally today. So, anyway, so the first method of Theseus is to, again, we're talking about research, we're talking about looking for things, like finding your way through something. So the first method, the method of Theseus of research, is about only concentrating on the very next step. So you're, roughly speaking, very abstractly speaking, you're somewhere, and what you do under the method of Theseus is you think what your next step should be, and only that, and nothing else. Like where you should go according to where you are right now. Alright, so you have, roughly speaking, a local vision, only like literally your immediate surroundings, and you choose where you should go, whereas the result of your action, like you certainly are going somewhere, but you don't really know where, because the result, like your end goal, is hidden, right? So you only concentrate on the very next step. So, and iteratively, kind of step by step, you progress towards your goal, at least hopefully. So this is the first approach, and I can give you examples, although they would be kind of screwed up. Well, because I'm a scientist myself, so I can only give you, well, not only, but in some cases like this one, very abstract one, I can give you a scientific example. Like in mathematics, if you have a surface, let's say you have an XY plane, and above it, like a function that depends on x and y, which is z, for example. So you have a surface, like three-dimensional surface, but it's kind of two-dimensional in the sense that the third coordinate depends only on the first two, right? So roughly speaking, a terrain map, for example, like the height of the terrain depends on latitude and longitude, for example. So one of my lecturers back at the university, he actually made, actually a great guy, he taught us mathematical analysis. So his PhD thesis, I think, or at least one of his main works, was about like finding a maximum or a minimum of a function of this sort, like the surface. Let's say you want to find a peak of this particular piece of terrain, or the maximum trough, so to speak. So the method was like you pick a random point and you just check like the maximum deviation of height in all directions, and then you move either downwards or upwards. And in this way, you kind of find your way to the maximum or the minimum, whatever you look for. So it would be an example of this Theseus type of approach, where you only can judge about the next step. Like you don't know the whole map, you only know your immediate surroundings. So and you judge, you have a rule set, let's say, that you follow, right? Like, okay, well, we should go as much downwards as possible from where we are. So this is a rule set and we follow it, etc. And we find the minimum, hopefully at least. And why do I call it Theseus' approach? It's because, well, it's because of this myth of Minotaur or Minotaur, whatever you wish to call it, and the labyrinth. See my video, Glass Labyrinths of Power, where I use the same labyrinth metaphor for other reasons, obviously. And Ariadne's string. So Ariadne was a lover of Theseus, and she helped him by giving him this string that was supposed to help him to find his way out of the labyrinth, right? So this is the idea. You have a rule set. In this case, in the case of Theseus, you just follow the string, follow the thread, right? You don't know where the end of the labyrinth is, so you just follow the thread. Like on you take each turn wherever the thread goes. So it's kind of obvious, I would say. So hopefully, again, it would help, this metaphor. So in some sense, you might call this approach a scientific method in the first place, right? Because it's in some sense, again, it's the most disinterested kind of approach. Of course, you can say, well, we are interested to find the goal. It's just that our methodology doesn't necessarily include the goal in what we enact, right, on every step. So in this sense, it's disinterested. So in this, again, very narrow sense, you might say it's objective, right, in the usual sense of the word. So we have no idea what is at the end of our thread, but we have a belief that this rule set of ours, i.e. following the thread, would lead us to some better end than wherever we are right now, the beginning. So there exists a clear algorithm, etc. So, which means that it's infinitely repeatable, which again reinforces the idea that it's scientific inherently, right? Because, well, again, repeatability was one of the main crucial points in terms of like what experiments should we trust in, let's say, British empiricism, speaking about Francis Bacon and people like that. I mean, British empiricism versus, let's say, continental rationalism, which again was sort of a quasi-discussion. Well, not really, because people barely meet each other back then, but it's acknowledged today by today's historians, I guess, of science, of philosophy, that there was this argument between empiricists, mostly in Britain, and rationalists, mostly on the continent, like Spinoza and Leibniz, Descartes, etc. So this British empiricist method speaks about repeatability, which is a noticeable characteristic of Theseus' method, right? Whereas rationalists, continental people, they talked more, again, roughly speaking, middle of the 17th century, they spoke more about the second approach, or at least what I would call the second method in this framework of mine in this video. So in particular, the examples would be how Descartes proves the existence of God, the famous cogito ergo sum, and things like that, and or how Spinoza uses this geometric approach to prove his ethical system, etc. That would be examples of the second method. And what it is, you would ask, well, it's this Ulysses approach that I've already mentioned. In particular, under this second method, we kind of already know where we want to get, right? So in the first approach, we didn't know where we're getting. We just had a method of getting there. In the second approach, we know where we are going to, or at least want to get, but we have no idea how to get there, at least initially, right? So we look for paths there, essentially. And we choose any paths that we think are bringing us closer to the goal, whatever the cost, again. So in the first approach, we had a sort of a local vision, limited by our walls of the labyrinth. In the second approach, we have a global map of things, but we don't know the route to where we're going. So we know where we are, we know where we're going, but we have no idea which route we will take. And so the destination is in some sense in view already. We just have no idea how to get there, right? Which kind of sounds paradoxical, but I hope you understand what I mean. And again, Ulysses is a perfect metaphor, I think, in this case. Well, maybe not perfect. Maybe I should have actually called it like Bilbo or Frodo approach method or something. But Ulysses and Theseus, it kind of sounds better together. So Ulysses, after the Trojan War, he wanted to get to Ithaca, right? His home island, or at least an island where he was a king. And he sought every opportunity to get at least closer to Ithaca, but as you probably know from Odyssey, it took quite a long time for him to get there. So it was a very, very non-linear way that he got there with. But anyway, that's the point, basically. We know where we're going, yet we don't know how we're going to get there. But we'll try everything that presents itself to us to achieve that. And this second approach is sort of quite obvious, I would say, in any sort of arguments and debates, where usually the positions are clear, the positions of people participating in those debates or whatever. So I defend this position, you defend this one, so we have a global map, right? And it's just the point, like, how are we going to get there? Like, what are our arguments? How are we going to defend or reinforce this position that we have? So how are we going to shift the public's opinion in our favor or in the favor of the other guy, etc.? So yeah, it's pretty fairly obvious in this case. And so all these arguments, arguments in favor of someone's position in those sort of debates, are only really used as an illusion of emulating this Theseus's approach. So Theseus is about following the method, the rule set, the logic, for example. Whereas Ulysses' approach is about following the goal by whatever means possible, which means he can twist the logic, like bend the rules, and like try to play with whatever cards he has. Right, so like to reinforce your position with any sort of means is about Ulysses. And by the way, it's kind of a good analogy in this sense, because Ulysses was considered to be a very clever and a very kind of deceptive kind of character in Greek mythology. So yeah, so it's only the illusion that he is logic. Look at how he deceived the Cyclops, or well, all those kinds of things. So, by the way, there are clear analogies with Bilbo's story, like when Bilbo asks Gollum, like unintentionally, like what is in my pocket, like it's also this sort of deception. And or where Ulysses says to this Polyphemus, I think, this Cyclops, my name is nobody. And when his brothers, the other Cyclops, ask the Cyclops, the Polyphemus or whatever, who like tore your eye out, he says nobody. And like what? Like, so yeah, it's kind of the same kind of trickery, you know. So whatever. By the way, speaking about the debates, I was thinking about initiating some sort of debate playlist, I guess, on this channel, but I still don't know how to organize it and like what the rules would be. But I was thinking about, and why am I telling you this? Because maybe you want to participate either as a organizer or as a participant or whatever. Well, then you're welcome. Maybe we can organize something like that. Like, I was thinking about this culture of rhetoric from universities and parliaments from Renaissance era and like even 17th century Britain. Like, if you look at how people argumented their position, it was so much more solid than today. It's just mind-boggling, and like the level of intellectual prowess of those people was so much stronger than today. So I would wish to like have something like that, some sort of, you know, intellectual jewel like that. So, or at least some sort of, I don't know, school or boot camp. I'm not saying like I'm a teacher of those things. I would actually like to learn from other people and like try to analyze what happened with them, and maybe we can come up with some ideas. Who knows? Just a proposition. So if any of you are interested, then I'll be glad to hear you out. Okay. Anyway, returning to the topic. So I've delineated those two approaches, right? The Theseus's approach, just follow the rules wherever they lead you to, and Ulysses' approach, like just try to get to your destination as by any means possible, right? So these are clearly there is some opposition between them. So and I should make clearly I side a little bit, at least, or maybe not more than a little bit, with this Theseus's approach, right? Therefore, I'm just stating this up front so that there would be no questions of this in this respect. So, just like in Templars and Assassins case. So, I should sort of, I would like to talk about some of the problems of the second approach of Ulysses, if you wish to call it like that. So, whenever someone brings forth some unobvious axioms or semi-irrelevant statements in their argumentation, it would actually make sense if they are doing that just to lure you, in some sense, just by like looking for an excuse to lure you with them into their own fantasy land, into their Ithaca, you know, on their ship, where you'd be probably along the way devoured by sirens or whatever else, or Scylla, is that the English transliteration, and Charybdis. So let's say if they stated, those Ulysses kind of people stated up front, where are they going and where are they trying to take you, you would say like, screw you, like, you suck, I don't like your fantasy land. So like, just, I'm not going with this ship, you know, you sail to your Ithaca alone, so to speak. But since they are trying to mimic this Theseus's approach, like trying to seduce you with their arguments, which seemingly are not designed, which actually they are, to lure you into this destination they're following you to, they're leading you to. So you may actually be seduced to do that, whereas you probably shouldn't, or whatever. I mean, it's your decision ultimately, but yeah. So what I'm saying is you should be Corona, yeah, again. Like somebody asked me on Skype, like, where's your Corona comments? Well, here they are. So essentially, yeah, that's what I'm saying. You should stay aware of those kinds of things, like unobvious axioms, unclear logics, like seemingly irrelevant statements, etc., because they all may be used in order for you to follow their agenda wherever they want to lead you to, right? And like, I don't really know why I remember this particular example, but on Thunderbolt's project forum, which is, well, an interesting place to visit, there was a guy with whom I've discussed like a couple of months ago, maybe more. There was an interesting topic he initiated, and I specifically kind of I was curious. I wanted to explore like the way he thinks, and I wanted to try some, again, rhetorical, I don't know, mechanisms, kind of half consciously. I kind of knew what I was doing, but kind of didn't at the same time. Like, now I understand much better why I did it and like how I did it exactly. And I'll summarize it up near the end of this video. But he was talking about, like, just check the idea out. He was talking about solving the problem of human suffering. Like, wow. That's pretty much the task of the philosophy in the first place, and religion, you might say, and even like economics and politics, like solving basically the human condition, the problem of human condition. But solving the problem of human suffering through alternative value of pi number. So the guy claimed that the pi is actually not an irrational 3.1415 blah 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 628, I think. The next number, I don't know. Actually, I'm not aware of that. But anyway, not this number, but an alternative number is correct, which is 4, I think, if I remember correctly, 4 divided by square root of phi, where phi is the golden ratio, right? So 1.618. Yeah, it should be something like that. So in the end, you arrive at pi equals to 3.1448, I think, or something like that. So I guess, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's something like that. But I'll actually put a link in the description or in the comments so you would appreciate the whole dialogue we've had with this guy, from which he actually disengaged afterwards, which is not surprising. But anyway, later he had even worse arguments, which don't follow from it. I mean, he tried to prove it in the first place with like very strange arguments that I've deconstructed pretty much easily, at least I think so. And then he arrived at even weirder conclusions from that, like something about speed of light, something about gravity, something about mass. Like, what the hell? It actually doesn't follow from anywhere here, let alone like the whole topic of pi equals to something which is not proven, which I think I've showed pretty clearly. But why am I telling you all this? Is it because, well, the guy clearly had an agenda, and he clearly tried to fit everything into this agenda, whatever the cost. I mean, we can deform whatever arguments we have just like to stuff them into the agenda, you know? So, and again, if you watch the discussion, you'll probably see what I mean. So I would advise you to beware, even though in my previous video I said I wouldn't advise you to do anything, but it's your choice ultimately. I should note. So advise you to beware, because if obviousness and clarity are are lacking at the very least, then maybe we're dealing with some dishonest, naive faith or stupidity, or even deception, who knows, right? And this kinds of behavior often are associated with like straw manning the arguments of your opponents, for example, etc. Right. That's pretty much what I wanted to talk about here in this segment. The next segment is going to be about, let's say, deliberate vagueness or fuzziness of arguments that people use. Especially in this Ulysses, again, it's still all a criticism of Ulysses type of approach. So a lot of people use, again, those deliberately vague and fuzzy terms in their research. Of course, again, but not only. We're talking mostly about those alternative scientists, but it's actually observed in mainstream scientists as well. I'll mention this a little bit later, I think, but whatever. So when people define terms poorly, when people then later, or not even define them at all, like just rely on some common knowledge type of definitions, or then even shift the definitions. So they were talking about one thing, then suddenly there's actually a name for this sort of fallacy. I just don't remember it. So what it allows them is to have more leeway, more slack, as British people say. I'm quoting myself from the previous video. So yeah, so it allows Ulysses to have a wider corridor, right, to maneuver you from your previous destination to the next one, so that you would be more likely to agree with them, basically. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm talking about. Like when people in, like, say, electric universe community and around it, when they say, oh, it's electromagnetic, definitely it's electromagnetic. Well, obviously, like, half of the things in the universe are electromagnetic. So it's like, it's deliberate vagueness of this statement. Like, what they imply is that it confirms their views, whereas, like, what exactly do you mean? Like, what exactly are your views, firstly? So please define the terms. And secondly, why exactly is this this particular thing fitting into your views? They're saying it's just electromagnetic. Well, of course, like, a lot of things are electromagnetic. Like, me sitting in this chair is electromagnetic. Like, yeah, but how exactly? What exactly is happening, right? Yeah. So this vagueness is a bane of any sort of rational discourse on any subject, really. And yeah, it's a serious problem. Like, really, people need to try to rectify what they're talking about and try to keep the narrative clean. But those are, of course, all almost inaccessible in the modern day and age, especially on social media, I should add. And another thing those Ulysses kinds of people use often is, well, Ulysses kinds of people sounds like ad hominem, so let me reformulate that. People who use Ulysses kind of method. So I'm not implying that the people are bad. I'm implying they're using bad methods, because just as well they might use a good method, right? Or at least be aware that they're using a bad method in this particular regard. So another thing people who use this method sometimes utilize is introducing a bunch of additional stuff, again, as part of this fuzzying, like this smokescreen type of methodology. So they just shoot at you with various things, hoping that at least one of those things would be related, right? And again, it's a thing I've noticed many times in many people. In particular, Ben Davidson would be a good example. Like, he just throws a bunch of terms, like virtually unrelated, hoping that at least one of them sticks. Again, electromagnetic is a perfect term because it sticks almost anywhere, because sticking itself is electromagnetic, right? Whatever. So I would say it's a variation of the so-called Texas sharpshooter fallacy, right? When you just shoot a bunch of stuff and then you say, well, the opposite party says, well, this one is actually correct out of the hundreds of what you mentioned. And you say, that's exactly what I meant. Exactly, yeah. This one is correct. So you see, I'm right. So yeah, certainly that's the thing. But in general, like this Ben Davidson's statement, I mean, I could analyze it separately under this particular agenda of Ulysses type of approach, but I don't feel like it deserves that much attention. So I'll just briefly mention that I would summarize Ben Davidson's current agenda, again, following my video, Ben Davidson and Suspicious Observers, which I've made like a year ago or half a year ago. So I would summarize his agenda. That's my view of what he's trying to say, both like verbally and non-verbally, what he's ultimately, like what he's saying. So it's not a direct quote from him, it's what I think he's trying to say. So his message ultimately is, I just want the sun to explode and I don't care how it's gonna do that. So whenever I try to, I mean, I don't know if you saw my email exchange, I've actually added, I think it's either to the description or to the comment section of the video about him, like Ben Davidson and Suspicious Observers, so you can look it up there. Or you can ask me in the comments to this video and resend it to you. So whenever I try to talk about any particular argument he makes, again, any particular logical conclusion that Ulysses tries to make to lure you into his final goal with you on his ship that is gonna sink most likely, but whatever. Whenever I try to judge or whatever, like criticize any of those statements, like he couldn't answer to any of those. Like whenever, and again, this fuzziness that I talked previously about, like this vagueness of his statements, like it's also kind of characteristic. Like, again, the mechanism of micronova is unknown. Like he says, well, it's the dust that's gonna fall onto the sun that's gonna cause it. Why is the dust going to fall onto the sun? Where is this dust? We don't see it. Like, how does the dust behave in the solar interplanetary magnetic field? He doesn't know that. He never even mentions any research into that. Do we have any examples of novae happening from the dust falling onto stars? No response there. Like, blah, blah, blah. Like, so, okay. Forget about that. The galactic current sheet. Again, I gave him arguments why it's not here, like anywhere near us, like hundreds of light years at least. He says, well, the Pluto's atmosphere is collapsing. Well, because Pluto experienced perihelion like 30 years ago. So it's understandable, whatever. That's one argument. But the whole point is that the vagueness of his argument is that, firstly, he's warning us, sort of, or, well, not really us, maybe, hopefully, smart people, but the people who believe him and follow him, that, and by the way, that's a bad argument as well. I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say the people aren't smart. I should say that following Ben Davidson is not a smart move. That's what I should have said. Because people may change their decision, and what it would make them wiser somehow? No, probably it's kind of the same people. It's just they made a better decision, right? All right. So the current galactic current sheet, in his estimation, is firstly already here because he associates Carrington event with it. He associates whatever kind of crap happened in the last 200 years with it. But at the same time, he says it's not yet here. And when I literally asked him, what do you think is the thickness of the sheet is, and how quickly it passes, I had no response, because obviously if he gave me the particular response, it would be easily falsified, You would say, well, no, it doesn't agree with the parameters of plasma we observe around the solar, blah, blah, blah. So you can see how this vagueness allows Ulysses a leeway, a slack, to maneuver you with his ship wherever he wants. So yeah, it's kind of a characteristic of these sorts of methods, not people. Okay, even Ben Davidson is not a bad guy, I think. I think he does bad things, in my estimation, but he's not a bad guy, probably. All right. All right, yeah, another example, just as an example. I actually wanted this next video, instead of this one, to be about thermodynamics and statistics, which I kind of promised sometime before, maybe even half a year before, or even a year. But I watched, I looked at it, and I thought, well, it would require half a year of research at least, just intense research, and so yeah, no way. But I can tell you right now that the thermodynamics idea of temperature is made in the same way, in the same Ulysses type of way. I mean, the notion is constructed in this way, where in some respects we mean by temperature one thing, in other respects another thing, in other respects a completely different thing. But we kind of play it out as if it was the same thing all along. Whether there is no real connection between the three, or even more than three. So yeah, it's definitely a problem of many fields of science as it is right now. So yeah, that much I can guarantee you. But okay, we'll talk about thermodynamics some other time. Speaking about Theseus's method, is it that good? Why do I only criticize Ulysses's method? Well, mostly I criticized it because a lot of bad conclusions are made from utilizing this method. That was really the main reason. But the method itself, as it is not that bad, but we'll see it a little bit later. But is Theseus's method that good? Is it a better alternative? Well, I wouldn't say so, because even though the method is kind of neat and cool, it's not bulletproof as well, because, our main premise under it is that we have a method, an algorithm, a rule set that kind of should work. But who says that it's going to work? Again, returning to this Assassin's type of skeptical type of approach, if there is no God, if mathematics doesn't rule the world, if we don't have any physical laws embedded into, or reality, how do you say it? Producing from some basic physical laws, but rather physical laws are imposed onto reality by us, for us to orient in it better. So how can you claim that any sort of rule set, essentially also discovered at the very least by us, I mean at the very best I should have said, should impose any sort of restrictions onto reality? So how can we be sure that by following any sort of rule set that even have worked previously would bring us success in the future, because, well, again, see my video probability and possibility, like the future is ultimately unknown. So even if something worked in the past, how can we be sure it's going to work in the future? And the answer is we can, basically. That's the best answer we can go with. Even the narrower question, like, okay, well, we pretty much established that the general rule set of, let's say, science, by the way, science is only maybe 400 years old. So are you sure it's applicable all the time, everywhere? I don't think you can claim that. Even though it sounds almost like heretical today. Well, maybe not today, especially on social media. But whatever. Even a narrower question, would this particular method of science work in this particular object of study of science, is also, well, this question is basically, the answer is no. I mean, in the most general case, because, and I mean, we clearly have examples where this is not the case, but returning to the metaphor of the method itself, like Theseus and Ariadne's string or a thread or whatever, we might say like, well, who's gonna guarantee, metaphorically speaking, that Ariadne didn't give us a fake string or fake thread or whatever, or some magical thread that's gonna lead us to some ninth circle of hell or whatever, which often happens in love, I should add. Or like, because she was jealous that Theseus was flirting with Andronicus or whatever, which was a case in ancient Greece. I mean, guys were kind of having fun. Or maybe someone messed up the string, the thread, or maybe even Minotaur, or some homeless person from San Francisco was in this labyrinth, and they messed up the string, and Theseus arrived again into the ninth circle of hell, or wherever else. So what I'm saying is, sometimes the method doesn't work, and we know for a fact this is the case. In particular, like, we can talk about, well, just take any example of a method that works in a particular problem of science and doesn't work in many others. And it would be, generally speaking, any method. Well, I can give you examples easily from my own practice, like non-perturbative methods, like perturbation theory. It's a great method. It's a really, really powerful vehicle for theoretical physics. What it does, essentially, is utilizes the fact that it's going to be probably a long digression, but I hope it would be amusing at least, or at least educating at the very least. So we have a physical problem. Let's say something, well, it's actually a bad problem to illustrate this, because factually speaking, it's incorrectly said, but let's just examine it as a practical example, so I wouldn't talk about some abstract whatever types of things, right? So we have height of the tide on the ocean. We have a large force that pushes or pulls this tide downwards, which is Earth's gravity, right? But we also have much smaller force, which is lunar gravity, which pushes it sometimes up, sometimes sideways, sometimes downwards. And again, for the physicists out there, I repeat, this is an incorrect example, but it would help to understand the idea. The thing is, we can calculate the height of the tidal wave when we take the precise function of the height of the wave, which we cannot calculate because it's super complicated. But we can dissolve it into a series, algorithmic series, polynomial series, where we have small parameter, what is called, which, oh damn, well, I got so deep, I don't even know how to get out of here. Okay, so the idea of perturbative method in the first place is we have a physical problem with one large parameter and one very small parameter with respect to it. So when we produce our mathematical operations, in some cases, in some very important cases, we can neglect the smaller parameter. So we have, let's say, multiplication of large parameter and small parameter. We keep it because we have a large one, but we have a small parameter squared and we just ignore it because it's small thing squared, it's even smaller thing. So in this case, we can simplify our expressions like infinitely large respect. Okay, so in this example with Earth and Moon, Earth's gravity is a large parameter, Moon's gravity is a smaller parameter. Therefore, we can take the precise function of the height of the wave, decompose it into Taylor series, this infinite polynomial series. It can be done for any algebraic function. It has been proven again in the 17th century or maybe early 18th century, but it's a very powerful vehicle. And we can get rid of all the terms that contain, you know, larger powers of smaller parameter, which is lunar gravity. And we can arrive at what is called the first approximation, the linear approximation, which only contains the first power of the smaller parameter, okay? And this technique has been used so much in theoretical physics, it's almost like the most powerful technique. And like quantum electrodynamics is based on it because we have a small parameter there, which is the fine structure constant, etc. And many other fields also benefit from it. But in the same quantum field theory, we have problems which are what is called non-perturbative. So perturbative technique, which I've just described, doesn't work because we don't have a small parameter. And one example is strong interaction physics, where well, supposedly quarks and gluons inside the nucleon, inside a proton, for example, interact. And their interaction constant is of the order of unity, of the order of 1. It's not 1 over 137, which is the case for electromagnetism, at low energies at least. So we cannot have this decomposition into Taylor series and neglect like most of its terms, right? Only leaving the first couple. We have to include all of them, which is infinitely many, which means we cannot calculate this. We cannot use the Taylor series. We cannot use anything like that. So we have to adhere. We have to use some other methods. So yeah. So this usual rule set that we previously had, perturbative theory, no longer works. And it even doesn't work in many mechanical problems, seemingly very simple ones, but again, there are so-called non-holonomic problems but you get the idea, right? So the method is not absolute. So even by having this thread, this string of Ariadne, you might get nowhere because you might just get deeper into the labyrinth rather than out of it. Something like that. And another example would be, for example, again, famous Navier-Stokes equations, the differential equations that describe liquids, fluids in general, their behavior. Like some people, let's say in like 19th century, could have thought, maybe early 19th, I don't know, really, I don't remember when Navier-Stokes equations appeared, but some people could have believed that, okay, differential equations seem to be the thing. They would help us solve everything. But Navier-Stokes, Navier and Stokes, those are different guys, obviously. They came up with these equations describing fluids from first principles, well, certain principles at least. And it turns out those equations are unsolvable. We cannot solve them. We have no idea. So not only we don't have a solution, we don't even know whether a solution exists. That's how bad it is. So currently when people model fluids, they of course numerically solve the equations, but whatever. So it turns out that differential equation technique is not as powerful as we thought. So yeah, our thread, our string, again, lured us even deeper into the labyrinth than previous. Well, of course, to have an equation that may not even have a solution is better than to not even have an equation, right? So at least that much is good. At least, like, we're not completely in the darkness. We have a thread, but we have no idea if it leads us to where we want to go, you know? It's that kind of situation, ultimately. All right. I need to move quicker, but okay. Both methods, this Ulysses and Theseus's method, they are sometimes used in tandem, like together, to confirm the results of each other, basically to fudge, right? And again, an example might be a confinement of quarks. I just give you like real life examples for you to, even though you may not be familiar with it, but at least you would have some solid, you know, something to look at. Like confinement of quarks, the problem is, again, we've inserted, essentially constructed those quarks and gluons inside protons and neutrons. Again, brilliant book, Constructing Quarks by Andrew Pickering. And the idea is that we don't observe, it's not an idea, it's an observation. We don't observe quarks, neither quarks nor gluons in a free state outside of proton, let's say. So we say, well, there's a problem of confinement, which means they are confined in the proton. So in the proton they are free, but outside of it they aren't. Like, what is the reason? Again, one explanation, a simple one, is again non-perturbative effects of the strong interaction. Like, as long as quark is at small distance, it's free, but when it goes farther from other quarks, it's actually, the farther it goes, the stronger it interacts with the other quark. So it kind of, well, it's a separate story. But what I'm saying here is we have a Ulysses type of observation, which is the result, the confinement of quarks. Quarks are not observed as free particles. That's a Ulysses type of thing. We see a goal. We see what we should arrive at with our theory. And we have a Theseus type of thinking trying to arrive at that goal. So we're using both methods together, right? So we have a solution, and we're trying to fudge our theory to the we're trying to fudge our rule set to get to this solution, right? So it's one example is confinement of quarks. So any theory of strong interactions should end up with confinement as this limit case at large distances, right? By the same token, any theory of Big Bang cosmology, which is kind of rubbish on its own, but still, I'm giving you factual examples from real-life physics, which is dominated by Big Bang. So any example of cosmology based on Big Bang hypothesis should end up with asymptotically flat universe. So the universe should be flat at the edges, very far away from whatever, under this mythology. So it's, again, this Ulysses type of goal. And we're trying to fudge our theory to arrive at this goal and pretend that we're acting in a Theseus type of manner, right? Where actually we actually focus on the goal in the first place. And yeah, so it basically, as you can see, it kind of hides whether Theseus's approach is actually even applicable here, because we already focus on the goal firstly. So it kind of corrupts the Theseus's approach with Ulysses' agenda, you might say, or something like that. If you know the result, I mean. Although the famous American physicist, or maybe British, I think American, John Archibald Wheeler, again, the author of this concept of it by bit, emergence of matter from information, which is a stupid idea, I would say, but anyway, he's very famous. He's one of the authors of this famous book on gravitation by Misner, Thorne, Thorne, yeah, one of the consultants of Interstellar movie. So Misner, Thorne, and Wheeler, right? Anyway, he said that it's actually very fruitful to know the result of your problem before you start to solve a problem. Like, it would give you a hint of how to solve it. But I would say it's a sickly approach again, because, well, I mean, your solution would be biased. That's what I'm saying. It's not following from scientific method, but it's following from, well, this cheating ultimately. What if the solution you know about is wrong? That's a good question. I would wish to ask Wheeler about it, but whatever. He'd probably answer some stupid stuff on it anyway. And there was the similar type of fudge, like trying to unite those two approaches with CMB, cosmic microwave background. Again, people arrived at all kinds of numbers for CMB temperature, like 40 Kelvin. But then there was this famous issue of the journal, I think it was an astrophysical journal, but I may be wrong, where basically in close succession the papers came about the prediction of the correct temperature, and the very next paper was about the observing this very predicted temperature, which is, again, it's a clear example of the same thing. You know the result and you fudge your theory to fit it, right? Whereas, again, even the fact that this result is actually the observed thing is not guaranteed. I mean, if you listen to Pierre-Marie Robitaille, it might be oceans, but it may actually be the universe itself, but whatever unknown process from all the distant stars or whatever. Okay, so let's talk about motivation quickly. So Ulysses' approach, the motivation is pretty clear. We already have a goal. Whatever the goal is, whatever the reason for this goal is, like pushing any sort of religious or quasi-religious or political or Templar agenda, if you review my previous video, or reinforcing your own ego, like attacking the proverbial Einstein, like see my video Cult of Einstein and Hawking, dash Stein, not slash, I want to say slash. Like, again, if I attack this big guy, I would be recognized myself, right? The idea is, so the Ulysses goal is to attack the big guy, all right? And I would actually say it's a decent idea, because as Stendhal, the famous French writer, said, not literal quote, but the point is that a duel is the best way to enter the higher society, you know. You're an unknown prick from some village, but you attack with a duel some, I don't know, aristocrat, and you become known yourself through that, right? Good idea. So, again, motivation for Ulysses' type of approach is clear. I mean, Ulysses himself wanted to go home, basically, where he is a king, at least. But the motivation for Theseus is not as clear, at least how I described it, right? Like, why should he follow this rule set in the first place? And I would say, again, returning to a more abstract level, like abstracting from the metaphor, we might say, well, practically, let's say, in scientific research, money can be a tool of motivation. So you might literally, as a scientist, act as a mercenary, literally. So you have your own tool set, like literally your toolbox. You almost act as a plumber or something. And somebody says, I need this tube fixed. And you just go there and fix it. With your tool set, with your rule set, with your procedures, right? Which are like set in stone in this particular case. They act as a black box. So somebody says, well, I need you to calculate this triple integral. And you say, okay. And you go and do that, and they pay you $100 or $300, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Or any other sort of research. So they can just pay you, and you act as literally a cog, right? You just do your thing, what you're supposed to do. That would be a decent motivation, and I don't see anything bad in it. Other motivation, however, for scientists, plural, to follow some sort of rule set, some sort of strict method, would be their own fascination with some stuff. So it's not necessarily they're following some agenda about things. They're just fascinated with things themselves. And this is probably the most like genuine science, not like engineer type of science, but like the most, kind of natural, artistic type of science. Not autistic, but well, who knows, maybe sometimes it is. So, like, again, see my video, Inheritance of Ideas, where I talked about, like, how your personal experience may impact your ideas, and experiences in very broad sense may impact your interests, right? So, for some vague reason, whatever reason, many reasons actually, you can be interested in whatever, minerals, mosquitoes, whales, the moon, psychology, whatever, like, and you can be genuinely interested in all those things, or at least one of those things at the same time. Okay, so it would be another motivation. So even this sort of quasi-objective Theseus type of approach is not really that objective. It might be very subjective. I mean, it is objective by the tool set, but it's subjective in terms of motivation. So you're not really doing this for the universe. You're just curious yourself, and you wish to share it later, of course, for having the power afterwards. I mean, will to power is pretty much the only thing that motivates human beings, and not only human beings, but whatever. And there's nothing bad in it. Okay. There was a person some time ago that I've encountered, I don't know, maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, who said that he actually had a very similar insight that I had in my video, that I've described in my video, Comment About Comments, where I said that, well, motivation of people's views, so this Ulysses goal is really, really hard to change. But at the same time, he acknowledged there, just as I do here, that Ulysses type of behavior implies that you have a motivation and you choose whatever fits your, like, whatever presents itself to you to move towards that goal, right? So the point of this person was, it's therefore pointless to attack whatever Ulysses people use to reach their goal. Again, not Ulysses people, it's a bad statement. I should have said people utilize Ulysses type of method, right? So whatever they use to reach their goal, because the goal is preset and it doesn't really matter what they use to them at the very least. They just want to reach the goal. So the person said that you should therefore ignore whatever methods they use. You should attack the goal, the motivation. And it was kind of a good point on its own, but again, following my video Comment About Comments, you see that it's actually a stupid idea, if you agree with me at least. Because those goals, those motivations, you cannot change them that quickly. Perhaps you cannot change them at all in some cases. In some cases you can, well, not really you can, but they can change sort of on their own. Maybe you can contribute to that, but it would only be a certain contribution. It would certainly not the tipping point on its own. So it requires time, first and foremost, and some changes in person's life. Right? And so, yeah. So I would claim the vice versa. You shouldn't attack the motivation and point because it's meaningless. Like, at best, what you're gonna achieve with that is that the person would get defensive and would resist everything you say to them, right? So my policy in this respect, that would, again, I embody myself in those cases, and maybe you would like to, but it's your choice ultimately, is to vice versa attack the methods that people use. Well, it's pretty much a trivial point. You just engage in an argument and attack the points of a person. And again, that's where, for example, the how would you say it? Like the forbiddance is not appropriate word here. Like, well, basically, you shouldn't engage in ad hominem, because ad hominem means not only you're attacking the motivation of a person, you associate the person with the motivation, like in a single, unseparable thing. Whereas a person might actually change their motivation, again, with given enough time. So ad hominem is like the worst thing you can possibly come up with in an argument. It's like a game over. It's like, again, I was talking about this, like you're calling someone a Hitler, or they call you Hitler. It's like a proverbial game over. Like you have no arguments left, basically. So a Hitler is like this straw man of a like ultimately bad person with ultimately bad motivation, right? That's what I'm talking about. So you attack both the person and the motivation, and you're saying they're both rubbish. Whereas I would say it would be more reasonable to attack the arguments themselves, because they don't imply any person and any motivation at all. In some sense, you're not even attacking anyone. You're saying that, well, this point is stupid, and that's why, blah, blah, blah. Poo, poo, poo. Try to fight this one, you know. You can't, because, well, it doesn't contain you at all, and all your authority and all your whatever. Just attack those points. Here they are. It's like chess, you know. You're not fighting, even though there's a huge guy against you. You're not fighting. It's the board with figures, right? So let's play on this board with those figures, and then like disregard everything else. All of our goals, of course, we both want to win in this framework, in this setup, but who knows, maybe we can learn something from it. Whatever. So yeah, I choose to usually like just coldly, methodically, and ruthlessly attack the arguments themselves, and it's usually ends up pretty good. At the very least, people just disengage. Whether it's good or not, I don't know, but at least, again, as I've said in my video comment about comments, like again, my goal wasn't even to try to make them to abandon their motivation, their goal, their political / philosophical views, moral views. My goal was to make my point, and perhaps give my points as weapons to other people who would be later attacked with the points that this guy made, right? So in some sense, I was kind of making my own views more influential, because I was giving away weapons to fight this other conflicting ideology, right? Which was against mine. So it's kind of a good thing, I would say, in general. So that's what I would recommend people to do. But of course, it's your choice, ultimately. So ultimately let Ulysses to go to his Ithaca alone without any public's participation, right? That's your ultimate goal. Like, let them just go. But you just attack their arguments they make to lure people with them, right? That's what you do. You don't attack Ithaca, you don't attack Ulysses' personality, you just attack the arguments they make that we should actually go right there. Like, why? And usually, if you do that subtle, like precise enough, it would be clear that they're actually wrong. But whatever. So, okay, let us conclude. Oh, damn, this video was even longer than the previous one. I hoped it would be at least maybe 10% shorter. It actually started, believe it or not, from one paragraph, like my note from 2012, one paragraph long, and it became even longer than the previous video made from 3 separate essays. Okay, so to conclude, I've delineated 2 methods of research, or like scientific inquiry, any sort of search type of inquiry, which is Theseus's method, which is basically to follow the local vision. You have a rule set, an algorithm, and you follow it according to your vision that you immediately see around you. Say, follow the red lines. Okay, there's a red line. Okay, I'm going there. Okay, what's next? Okay, there's a red line. I'm going there. Okay, abstractly speaking. So it's roughly a scientific method kind of following. So we follow logic, we follow some basic assumptions like the law of conservation of energy or whatnot, blah, blah, blah. And we arrive at some result which we didn't know previously at the beginning, right? So this is the Theseus type of method, whereas Ulysses type, because Theseus followed Ariadne's string to go out of the labyrinth. So the string depicts the rule set, the algorithm. Whereas Ulysses' method is the second one, is we know the end goal. So we have a global map where we are and where we want to go, but we have no idea how we're going to get there, right? So we choose whatever route is accessible to us currently. And I've criticized this approach a lot and blah, blah, blah. And I've said that the first one is kind of better, but whatever. I don't want to stop on this right now because it's the conclusions. So as an epilogue, sort of, I wish to quote Ralph Waldo Emerson, arguably the best American thinker, who said that the good, again paraphrasing, good piece of art has the same right to exist as the sun and the moon and the trees. And I would add to that a good scientific theory as well, because science is pretty much the same thing as the method, scientific method, and hopefully I was able to show you that in this video. So whenever a scientist describes his method fully, completely, like this set of rules, this Ariadne string, then his work is done ultimately, because everyone can repeat it ultimately, infinitely. Everyone can follow it. It's like crystal clear, it's transparent, and it's natural in some very fundamental sense. It's natural just like the natural phenomena themselves, right? And it just behaves like natural phenomena, which just present, again, in the sense of giving, like gift, present, themselves to you, like natural phenomena do, and not needing any justifications. All right, thank you for watching. The eons are closing.